to Let's Talk Dairy after a 2-week sojourn. So today I'm actually back on the grass again. I suppose I spoke about it 4 weeks ago now at this stage in terms of trying to hit the targets and the objectives that we have in relation to that. And I suppose things have taken a bit of a turn in the meantime. The beauty of an autumn or an August heat wave is the lovely temperatures, etc. But it does actually have an impact in terms, especially on top of the summer that we've had all along in terms of kind of stumbling along and not particularly fantastic growth, so poor conditions coming into the dry spell as well. So we're in a bit of a backward position really. And if we look at the figures that the lads produced there on Tuesday from PastureBase, they're showing that the stocking rate is, we'll say basically average farm covers are at 675 kgs per hectare, which means given that we're on the 18th of August now today, that we're on the date that the lads published that pretty much, we're about 75 kgs per hectare behind target for any farm that stocked the 3 livestock units to the hectare or higher. If we're on a lower stocking rate or cow to the acre type scenario, and if we're fortunate enough that there's silage ground coming back into the equation to bring stocking rate down to that, then it's not so bad from the point of view that we're actually okay if we're actually in a position where we could potentially take out some ground. But for the vast majority of cases, we're probably a little bit on the brink in terms of trying to build cover. Now that said, I'm only just trying to make people aware of it really. I'm not trying to be negative about it. It's been fantastic weather, obviously getting very good value out of what grass is being grazed. But generally speaking, there is silage going in. And I suppose I would have said a couple of weeks ago that would be an important piece of the jigsaw anyway in terms of trying to build cover, but it's actually going in order to hold cover in the vast majority of the scenarios that we're looking at the minute. And then we have big variation, anywhere from 2 kilos of meal going in, depending on location, up to 6 kilos of meal, all in an effort to try and keep cows fed. The only positive, I suppose, is obviously, or the other positive is, of course, that milk price is strong and has gone stronger again, with several of the co-ops already increasing for July milk. So that puts people in a very strong position for the payout that they're going to be getting for the milk that they're selling. That said, I suppose the question I'm going to pose to people today is, should you actually be milking every cow that you're going to carry on the farm, or that you are carrying on the farm currently? And from that point of view, I mean that, yes, there is very good payout, but I think if people were to look at milk recording figures, they would find that there's probably a proportion of cows that could actually leave the system and not necessarily impact in terms of financials really that dramatically, because if we're paying it out to bring it in, even though we're getting well paid for the milk that's going out in the lorry, the actual profit level mightn't be that significant in the overall scheme of things. And look, it's very, I suppose, unique and specific to every farm, because every farm is different in terms of grass position, different in terms of where they see themselves going in the next couple of weeks, we'll say, in terms of growth now that the rain has come. And then there are farms that have little or no rain got, actually, in spite of all the thunderstorms around the country in the last few days, and are still very much backs to the wall in terms of grass situation. So I think we just need to be conscious of, and I suppose, dare I say it, I suppose people are conscious as well of not actually getting rid of stock from the point of view of the talk of cow culling schemes, etc., and all this that's going on around emissions and so forth. But at the same time, I think invariably in the past, like we're only talking about a handful of cows here, and invariably in the past where people are trying to hold on to stock for different reasons, be it extra land coming up, all this kind of stuff, it generally doesn't actually pay that well to do that. So now look, I suppose if we're talking about 5,000 a cow for a cull, as was on the journal there a fortnight ago or 3 weeks ago, you would be saying, okay, would you try and hang on there? But look, that's all speculation, and I think you have to really deal with the here and now in a lot of cases as to see whether it's justifiable. And that scheme could be a good bit away anyway. And then there's also talk that it could be on a base year of a couple of years ago. So maybe you might have more cows than you had a couple of years ago, and that culling isn't going to be all that significant from that point of view. So I suppose the big thing that I would say to people is that you need to obviously know what your farm cover is now, and you have to make a decision then as to what you're going to do. Bit of a tricky scenario, I suppose, this week, in that the rain has come now, and we'll say growth rate obviously from last week into this week is going to be slightly misleading from the point of view of you're not going to have savage growth, but the growth is actually potentially coming. So I've seen some very good photos from some of the farmers that I'd be in contact with there, where water just maybe in one particular picture, roof water off of a shed was flowing out onto a section, and the difference in growth in that area, because he actually didn't get a lot of rainfall, I suppose, and obviously there was a lot more water fell on the section, or because of where the pipe was coming out off the shed, that got quite a lot of water. And the difference that made to growth is actually, I suppose, quite remarkable, really. And I suppose, again, even though we're kind of talking about building covers, we're actually looking at walking the farm every 5 days over the next couple of weeks, in order to try and keep a handle on where things are going and making the right decisions to try to make sure that our cover still goes some bit of the way to hitting target. Now, there is, I suppose, and this is speculation again on my behalf, I suppose there is a good chance that, given the way the forecast is looking for the forthcoming week, that there's kind of a bit unsettled, but obviously ground is very dry, very warm, soil temperature is very high. So we're going to get nitrogen mineralization. We're also going to see people applying some nitrogen as well, obviously, now that the weather has broken. So we should get actually, or there is a potential for a kind of a bounce in growth from all those factors coming into play, I suppose. And that could see us moving from a situation of being behind the curve to being ahead of the curve. And again, I suppose that would be the ideal scenario if we could bounce very quickly and recover very quick. But at the same time, I don't think we can just hope, as they say, in the strategy. So I suppose hoping for that to happen may not necessarily be a good thing. And I would think from the dry farms perspective, definitely, that there is probably, and actually, you know, from heavy farms even as well, for whatever reason, it's very strange. Heavy farms suffer when it's wet, but sometimes they can suffer maybe slightly delayed as well, but equally so kind of when the weather does get very dry as well, in terms of grass quality and so forth. So even if we did start to get a big bounce in growth, there's probably scope for 1 or 2 paddocks that need correcting and tidying up still around the place, even though it wouldn't be your kind of normal advice. And definitely, I suppose, as we move into September, we probably want to move away from moors, etc., in fields, on grazing platforms. But that said, grass quality and trying to build quality off of a good base is very, very critical to getting good cleanouts throughout that last rotation into October, and especially into November, when ground conditions get that little bit more tricky and so forth. So I suppose we're looking at a situation, as I said, where we're hoping for compensatory growth early in terms of a bounce from the heat, combined now with the moisture that has now come in a lot of cases, and with the mineralization that's naturally going to come following that very dry spell, along with levels of nitrogen that have gone out. So I suppose, generally speaking, you'll have seen the advice that the lads were given. You're talking probably in or around your 18, 19 units, maybe still, where you have good growth, or where you have moderate levels of growth, I suppose 40s to 50s. If you're in a very low growth, and again, looking at the predicted growth rates from Melody on Tuesday, you can see that up to the lower part of Leinster, I suppose, the southeastern part of Leinster, we still have growth rates that are only predicted to be in the mid-30s at best. So it's questionable still for those farms as to whether they should be applying nitrogen, because the growth just isn't there to take it up. So we maybe need to hold off another week there. I suppose on average, I would say, just looking at the map, that we're probably looking at somewhere in the mid-50s for most farms across the country, on the basis of Elodie's figures there on Tuesday. So that would say that we should be applying nitrogen now at this stage, and that would be okay to do so. So as I said, the 15, 20 units, and then I suppose we're beginning to move into a situation where we want to consider blanket spreading on the farm. Again, the decision around that will probably be made in the next 2 weeks, kind of, we'll say, depending on what way things go. But we're generally looking at maybe somewhere 25 to 30 units, depending on stocking rate, there around the start of September, late August. In order to get maximum return from that fertilizer, it's better to be applied earlier. So as I said, the question that has to be asked, I suppose, we've talked about the grass growth side of things, and that's the availability piece. What's the demand situation on one's farm then? So again, just looking at some examples that I've seen in the last couple of weeks, farms, I suppose, if we look at the average milk yield, there's good milk there. There's 22, 23, maybe even 24 litres on farms being produced, and that's very good output, but obviously that's the average output of your herd. So there are cows within the herd that are producing quite low volumes of milk. And I think we need to be critically looking at some of those cows, seeing there are definitely cows that I see looking at milk recording results that they have no business on the farm the coming year. And they should really be called now straight away, because they're not performing right now and they're not going to perform into the future either. Poor genetics, poor for maybe other reasons as well, just generally I suppose genetics, they don't have the ability to produce what the herd is producing, and they're never going to do it. So the way to make the herd faster is to cull the slowest buffalo, as they say. So I think people should, if under severe pressure for grass, should really look at knocking out some of these underperforming cows and look at the figures, look at your most recent milk recording, see what were they doing. And as I said, again, they are producing quite a sum of money, I suppose, in reality. If you look at it, 20 litre, a cow producing 20 litres at the moment are going to be generating incomes of €12 a day per head, like on the basis of a 60 cent a litre milk price, and it's actually higher than that probably, to be honest. So they are generating a fairly substantial income on a daily basis, obviously, like if we say call it €10, 70 euros a week that they're producing. Obviously they're eating meal, they're maybe eating silage then as well, and they're obviously reducing the grass availability for all the other cows as well. So you just have to factor those kind of things in. And again, I'm not talking about significant numbers of cows. I'm talking about taking out just underperforming cows that you just have to ask the question, is it worthwhile pushing hard to feed them when you could potentially actually increase availability of grass for other cows, or actually help yourself reach the target. So very crudely, I like just doing a sum of, if we say using 150 kilos, or if they're eating 150 kilos of grass, if you took out 10 cows at 15 kgs of grass per head, then that's obviously, in a 100 cow scenario, it's increasing the grass allowance available to the other cows by 1.5 kilos. So that could actually be the difference in between actually having to go feeding silage and maybe getting away with just feeding meal to build your cover. It's also obviously going to help to reduce your demand somewhat. So it reduces your demand, and you're also increasing your farm cover then as well, because you're increasing the difference between your demand and your potential growth, which, as I said already, we'll be hoping will be that little bit on the higher side, or on the stronger side, with the moist draft coming now. So look, I'll just show you the targets here. Again, just to remind you, I suppose, share screen. So these are the targets, and then just a final summary then in terms of what people need to think about. Okay, so the rotation length is probably the big driver for people that aren't measuring. Ideally, lots of people now should be measuring because of derogation. Oh, gone too far forward, too fast. So like you can see here, mid-August, 25 days. The easiest way to implement that for people is actually just divide the farm up into 25 and not give the cows more than that area for the day. If that's substantially less than what grasses or feed demand is for the herd, between the meal and the grass that you're feeding, then obviously silage will have to go in at that point in order to fill the gap. And I suppose you want to try and basically increase that now by 2.5 days next week. So you're going to 27.5 day rotation. So your area that you're going to be allocating is going to reduce. Keeping the fingers crossed, we're hoping that the grass availability will increase, and that maybe the silage level mightn't have to be that significant, or maybe people will just continue to feed meal. But going back to what we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, you would say that it's more likely now than it was even then that people are going to have to feed silage in order to try and hit some sort of a target. Now, there is also that potential, and again, we're keeping the fingers crossed, that will actually grow quite strongly over the next number of weeks, and that will actually help rectify the situation. But again, we have to try and react now, maybe to try and create conditions. And in particular, the most important thing that people have to take away from today is you cannot let your farm cover drop below 500 or 550, really. I think if you're in that position already, you need to react very quickly, because you need to slam on the brakes and try and let grass start to build on the farm again. Otherwise, you're going to become coming under extreme pressure to build cover. It's no different to the spring, that 550 cover, basically you dropped farm cover down too low. There isn't enough density of grass basically to grow grass, and we just fall behind very quickly. And it'd be very disappointing, I suppose, given the milk price that's there this year, to end up inside too early. Especially if weather plays ball with us and you had the potential to be out. And then the other risk, of course, is that people stay grazing in spite of the fact that they don't have a lot of grass in the spring, is a long, hard slog then in terms of having to continue to feed cows inside when they should potentially be out, or definitely be outside, or ideally be outside. So that's the targets, as I said. Divide the farm into 25 sections, we'll say, or into 25. See where you should be pitching yourself in terms of the area available to cows. The situation, I suppose, around the moving forward then, as I said, is reducing that area, and again trying to keep that gap filled, whether that's meal, which is your first port of call, up to potentially, I suppose, 6 kilos, maybe providing some bit of straw or hay, maybe just as a fibre source, because the grass that you're grazing isn't going to be particularly fibrous potentially. So just to keep them balanced in terms of fibre access, allow maybe access to a bit of hay or straw. And you should be okay in terms of feeding up to 6 kilos from that point of view. If we go beyond that, we're looking at having to introduce more feed in the form of silage or something like that. So that's that piece. I suppose there's just one question in there: how much fertilizer should be put out going forward? Growth at 22, buffer feeding since May. Can't see it stopping now, back 2.5 ton on last year. So that pretty much sums up 2022 for me. It's been a kind of a year where it's just stumbling along, basically. No opportunity. The more people I talk to, the less bales seem to, the more I hear less bales have been taken off the platforms this year. And it's not because of anything. So several people have asked the question, is it because of reduced fertilizer? But it's not down to that. It's down to the fact that there just hasn't been that kind of level of growth to sustain the farm, and it's been difficult to take out that surplus. And as a result, we're in the situation we're in. And the question of how much fertilizer, so I covered it there a little bit earlier. With a growth of 22 at the moment, you'd have to say it's pointless almost putting out fertilizer at the minute. You will probably get substantial mineralization. You're obviously on very dry soil, I would say, with a growth rate of 22. You have to wait until growth exceeds probably 35 or 40 to justify going with the fertilizer. And again, in your case, it's like we give blanket advice. It's very difficult to give blanket advice, obviously, because every case is different. There is possibly potential that there will be a good response to nitrogen that will be applied up to the deadline of the 14th of September in your case, because you're going to have very high soil temperatures, etc., and probably a growth that's going to carry as well. So just, I suppose, the final thing that I'd like to point out to people, I suppose, is there's a number of considerations. There's another question in there. Mineralization, I suppose. Mineralization is basically when the soils are dry, soil microbial activities basically ceases because there's no water for the microbes to act in. And when we get the soil getting reweighted, basically when we get the moisture, that allows mineralization of nitrogen actually that's in the soil, soil nitrogen that's there naturally, basal soil nitrogen, and kind of the residual of maybe earlier applications of nitrogen that haven't been used because of the lower levels of growth, makes the nitrogen available again. So in the past, I suppose, when we would have been using higher rates of nitrogen, we'll say your typical bag of Ken to the acre, or maybe 30 units to the acre, as people would have done. And I suppose we've learned a lot from the drought in 2018 in terms of application of fertilizer and growth rate and so forth. You would be seeing a scenario now where cows would get quite discontented, I suppose, over the next number of days, because nitrogen would surge up in the plant because of that mineralization, and that there was a lot of nitrogen in the soil to mineralize. I'm open to being corrected here now, but I would expect that probably won't be as severe going forward, given that we've definitely a lot lower nitrogen rates applied all along. So I suppose, like, the idea, if we talk to William Burchell about it, William will tell you that what you're applying in 20 units is enough to grow your 14 or 1500 cover. We haven't been necessarily growing that, I suppose, in the last number of weeks. So that means that there is nitrogen there available. And then when we apply the extra nitrogen that we will be applying when we're in our growth rates of our 35 plus kind of scenario, we have a moderate level, but a reasonable level to support growth, but not an excessive level that it's actually unsettling cows. So that's the mineralization piece. And that's why it's important that there's that background nitrogen being mineralized on an ongoing basis until we get to very exceptionally dry weather where, as I said, it ceases because there's no soil moisture there to keep the microbes active. So the last piece that I want to cover, I suppose, is in terms of this, if we are deciding to cull cows, we have to keep one or two things in mind. And that is, so I suppose just to summarize, farms that are greater than 3 livestock units to the hectare are currently behind target according to pasture-based information. There is a chance that we will get a compensatory growth now that the rain has come. We've gotten 25 mils here in the last number of weeks, or in the last number of days, sorry, with a little bit extra even in the falling this morning, and very good and warm conditions yesterday as well. So that's actually very strong growthy weather, I would say, and we would expect that would drive things on a little bit. There is a very, very good milk price there, so it is very tempting to milk on the cows, but you have to remember, are the cows that you're talking about holding on to, are they all performing? So we need to look at those cows and make sure that they are all performing. There will be definitely, I will have no doubt in my mind, that there are 1, maybe 2 or 3 cows in every herd that if they were gone in the morning, you wouldn't actually notice an impact in the bull tank possibly, because they're just not really performing. I suppose given that the milk price is so good, it is, as I said, it's going to be tempting to continue on. However, input costs are high, and we maybe have to factor in that we will have to regrow the silage if we eat silage this year, because we've held on to it now. Obviously, there's a certain amount of silage going to be consumed anyway, and it'll have to be replaced. But just from the point of view of, are you going to feed cows that are underperforming just for the sake of keeping them and have to turn around and replace it? It's a big sum, it's an arduous sum to do, but like if we factor all these things in, you could actually find that as good as the milk price is, that those 2 or 3 cows, as I said, are actually costing you money, or maybe break even at best. A very, very important point to note for people is the tax position. Big tax exposure coming this year, despite everything, despite the price of fertilizer, despite the price of feed. Tax exposure is going to be significant, and I spoke about it a number of weeks ago, and we spoke about it with Patrick going as well, that we need to be very conscious of that. And I suppose selling cows obviously is going to add to the revenue earned. So you need to factor in that if you're doing that, maybe that there's a potential that you're going to increase your tax bill. So I think people really do need to talk to their accountant and spend wisely. We spoke about that as well a couple of weeks ago. But that there is scope for spending on foot of the good milk price year, and also good stock sales, obviously. So if you are selling stock, be conscious that you could get a bump in money, and that money could come on top of money. We'll say if you've been in the habit of calling cows later in previous years and you call them early this year, you could be kind of getting a double whammy in terms of cull cow position. So just people need to be conscious of that. And then a very, very significant one, I suppose, is winter housing and storage facilities. Our slurry storage date is coming forward in 2022 to the 8th of October. And now there's still the possibility that we will be allowed to spread some of the material that's generated up to the 15th of October again, but that is not guaranteed yet. So we are actually in essence kind of in the short term increasing our slurry storage by a week in all our areas. So how are you fixed for that? You need to look at your winter housing and your storage facilities in terms of that, and would culling cows or reducing cow numbers actually solve a problem for you in the short term. And it's very important that we do try to square that circle, I suppose, in terms of having adequate storage. We had a very kind January in 2022. We don't know what the January of 2023 will have, and we might need all the storage that we have available. So in summary, I suppose people need to sit down and, well, first off, you need to walk the farm, assess your grass position, know where you're at relative to the targets. And then secondly, you have to decide that if obviously you're behind target, if you're ahead of target, sure, quids in basically, I suppose. But that's it. I'd still say that people need to consider looking at some of the cows that they are milking. Are they justified? Cows that are, maybe any cows that are lame or anything like that need to be maybe dried off, maybe put to an outblock or something to increase availability. They're probably not producing that much milk. So just be ruthless, I suppose, in terms of the assessment of cows in that sense. And then the other thing, obviously, is to if you're behind target, obviously, then you have to ask the question of should you carry all the cows that you have at the moment. And I'm talking about cows even maybe that potentially might be in calf even. If they're not really doing the business for your farm, you should ask the question: do they have a position on your team? It's basically like the strongest 15 needs to be out all the time, and if there's any weakness in the team, there's a risk that the team is going to fail. So I suppose that's the long and the short of it. That's it for today. I suppose, as I said, there's a bit of food for thought for you there. I suppose coming back to the emissions piece, I haven't started with David yet, but I'm in advance of the Johnstown Castle Open Day that's taking place on the 30th of August. I hope to talk to David Wall next week. And it's been a request from some of the people that are tuning in to Emma Louise on the podcast and myself there that we might cover the options or I suppose looking at the challenges that have been posed for us. What are the opportunities and what are the things that people can be doing in the short term to achieve our carbon emissions reductions targets that have been given to us. So I hope to talk to David a little bit about that to kind of give a preview on the Johnstown Castle Open Day, which will be looking at that particular area. Okay. So in the meantime, all the best to everyone. Have safe farming for the week ahead, and we'll talk to you next week. Thank you.